For disclosure, I'm a very small sponsor of it. But we've got so many great arts events, especially this time of year. John Miles is our speaker this morning. I've known him for maybe 10 years. I've not read his book yet, which I apologize for, but he's a very motivational person, has a lot of great ideas. His book, by the way, is in the back. Barbara, who checked you at the front desk, has them. I think they're $30 if you want to buy one. So he's got a bunch of them there if you are so inspired. John has a lot of things in his background. He's an author, a podcaster, an entrepreneur. He lives in St. Pete, so thanks for driving over this morning. His book was recently recognized by the Next Big Idea Club, and also was included in the Best Business Minds Book of the Year. So I will let him explain more about who he is and what is in his book, and don't forget to take it back.
Thank you very much, Bill, and I've heard so much about Cafe Con Tampa, and I'm just so glad and honored to be here with you all today. And today marks a really special day for me. Bill mentioned that I'm a podcaster, and the name of my podcast is the same thing as the book. It's called Passion Struck. I launched it 3 years ago today, and I am just absolutely overwhelmed by the results and the impact that it's had on a global basis. We've done over 30 million downloads. It's recognized in the top 6 most inspirational podcasts, the top 3 for mindset, and the top 4 for interviews. And the top 3 podcasts and the most inspirational were hosted by Michelle Obama, Oprah Winfrey, and Jay Shetty. So I feel like I'm very fortunate to be in some great company. So I wanted to start out today by asking you a question, and I'd like people to raise their hands. Have any of you ever felt stuck at some point in your life? Maybe you were stuck in a bad relationship, or in an unfulfilling job, or in some type of adversity. I think we can all say that at some point or another we've been stuck. And I've been trying to explore over the past 10 years, what does it mean to live the good life? Bob Waldinger, if you've not read it, had a great book that came out this past year called The Good Life. And if you're not familiar with him, he is a psychologist at Harvard, and he runs the Harvard Study on Adult Aging, which is a pretty remarkable study that's been going on now for over 8 decades. And they started out with 2 groups of individuals. One of them were privileged people who went to Harvard, and the other set that they examined were people who were not privileged. In that first group, it actually included John F. Kennedy. And what they found by examining them was that it wasn't monetary success or health or other things that brought them the good life. It was actually the most important thing they found was the relationships that they built with others and those close ties that built up their lives. But as I look back upon my own life, I certainly felt like I was living the good life. And a little bit of background on me is I grew up in York, Pennsylvania. Grew up going to parochial schools, graduated from York Catholic, and faced a pretty tremendous decision early in my life. Do I go to a normal university, or do I take an appointment to the Naval Academy? And I had gotten into Brown and Duke and a number of other schools and was a highly recruited athlete. And I really think that this was a defining point for me. I ended up choosing the Naval Academy, and I did it because both my father served as a Marine and my grandfather in the Army. And I wanted to serve myself, but I also wanted to learn everything I could about leadership. And so I graduated, and I embarked on a great career in the military. And I only got out because I received an appointment to become a special agent with the FBI. And I thought that was going to be my career. What ends up happening is sometimes God or life throws you some curveballs, and I was 3 days from going into this FBI Quantico class when Congress under the Clinton administration did the same thing they're doing now, and they started playing games with the budget, and my class got recycled. And my detailer called me up and said, I'm sorry, your class has been recycled, you're going to have to do something else. And so this launched a whole component of my career I never expected to go into. At this point, I had no plan B. I mean, who thinks that the FBI is going to bail on you? And I ended up finding myself as a management consultant, and before long I was the practice leader at Arthur Andersen, leading their cybersecurity practice for the Southwest region and their global threat practice globally. And then the unfathomable happened, and within 2 weeks, my $15 million book of business that I had built went to nothing as Enron collapsed the entire firm in front of my eyes. And I was again found in a period of 6 years having to start from zero, basically. I had just paid over $250,000 into the partner dues, and all this hit. And so I found myself on this career where I was highly successful. I was achieving great things. I had become the CIO of a Fortune 50 company by the time I was 39, CEO of a software company by the time I was 43. And yet, as I reached this point, I thought I was living the good life, but I was actually the most miserable I had ever been in my entire life. I had this profound emptiness that I can't even explain, and numbness that permeated everything about me. And so I ended up going to a therapist to try to figure out what was causing this. And after about 4 weeks of sitting down and talking to the therapist, he brought me in for our 5th session. He said, I want you to visualize yourself walking into your kitchen, and there's a stool. And I want you to think about your life sitting on this stool. And so I pictured myself on this stool. And then he goes, I want you to now think about that stool only has one support underneath it. And so I started thinking about that. And he goes, for you, that support has become the constant grind of trying to achieve in your life. And what's it doing for you? And at that point, I felt like I was about ready to topple over, and there was nothing that was going to catch me. And he said, I now want you to think about your life differently. Picture that same stool, but imagine it with a number of different supports underneath it. And these can be anything that you want in your life. It could be religion, it could be a philanthropic venture. I ended up deciding that for me, the pillars were going to be pillars of emotional health, spiritual health, relationship health, mental health, physical health. And I know many of you here are from Hyde Park Methodist. I myself am a Methodist, and I went through discipleship 1, 2, and 3. And as I was going through those in North Carolina, I had this phenomenal pastor who not only was a theologian, but he also had a PhD in history. And so it was the first time I ever felt that I really understood, in the context of modern day living, what the Bible really was telling us. And during this time, I had been receiving this voice that I look back and was definitely coming from God, telling me that I was on the wrong path. But the path that he was telling me to pursue, which the words that I was being given were to start helping the lonely, helpless, bored, battered, broken, and beaten of the world, was so foreign to me, I had no idea what to do with it. Here I am, the senior executive, this business person. I have no idea what that means, or even how to pursue it. So I started to ignore it. And as I started to ignore this throughout my life, more and more negative things started happening to me. I mean, biblical things. I had scorpions falling out of the ceiling and biting me when I'm in the shower. I had $250,000 worth of termite damage to my house in Texas. Another $150,000 worth of damage when we moved here to St. Pete from flood. And for me, it all culminated in November of 2017. I was renting a house in St. Pete at this time in the old Northeast, and I went to the gym like I did every single day. I happened to go to Orange Theory back then. I dropped my daughter off at school, and this day was unlike any other day for a couple of reasons. One, we had an electrical fire, and so the fire truck showed up, and my gym event turned out to be much shorter than I expected. So I went home, and unbeknownst to me, there had been a couple gentlemen who had been canvassing me and my home, and I walked in on an active burglary. And not only was it an active burglary, but it happens that the people who were doing it were managers or part of the management at my rental company and had been in my house a week prior examining where all my valuables were, including my firearms. So as I ran up the stairs to go change because I was going to go for a bike ride, I had that spidey sense as I'm about ready to hook a 90-degree corner that I wasn't alone in my house, and I started to hear this deep breathing. And as I turned the corner, my military training kicked in, and I immediately looked for a threat, saw that he was pointing my own gun, as it turns out to be, at me. And I had to make a life or death decision. Am I going to charge him on the stairs where he's pointing a gun at me and has a higher position, a better vantage point than I do, or am I going to try to evade and get out of there? And I ended up, I think, wisely choosing the second one. And just as I was in the process of trying to process this, I heard many of you talk about the arts. I was on the board of directors for the Warehouse Arts District in St. Pete for about 7 years. I ran all their fundraising, and one of my best friends was an artist. And I say was because 4 days after this incident happened, he unfortunately jumped off the skyway and ended his life. And those two things, those two events, made me realize that I had spent so much of my life making money for other people, doing things to make other people successful, yet I hadn't pursued making my own dreams become a success. And so at that point, I realized that I had been ignoring this calling that I had been given for so long because I didn't really understand what was it that I was meant to do. And so I went into a period of really 2 years of deep introspection, trying to figure out what was this mission I was being called to help people with. And at its core, it came down to, I think so many people today don't feel like they have significance in their life. They don't feel like they matter. And if you think I'm barking up the wrong tree, I've got a couple powerful examples for you. So Gallup has recently put out surveys back to back to back showing that there are over 900 million people in 142 countries who feel unfulfilled. I was also studying work by Tom Gilovich, who's a psychologist at Cornell University, and he has done studies of thousands of individuals as they near death. And the shocking result to me was that 76% of them all had the same regret. And I thought it was going to be the regrets of the mistakes that we made in life, but that wasn't it. It was the what ifs, the should haves. It was not pursuing their ideal self. And so as I have started this podcast and created this book, it's really all about how do you create a life of significance. And what the book has in it is, as I started to think about how do I rebuild my own life, because there's this theory called self-discrepancy theory, if any of you have heard of it, but in it there are 3 dimensions of self. There's our actual self, which is who we are today. There's our ought self, which is who we think we should be because of the restrictions and the obligations that we have. And there's our ideal self, which is who we could become. And I found myself living as my ought self. I had got up in what Henry David Thoreau calls this life of quiet desperation, and that's absolutely what I felt. I had found myself in this career that when I was a kid I never imagined this was what I wanted to do. Yet I was here and I was chasing all the wrong things, and I couldn't find a way to break free from it. Because at this point I had the mortgage, I had the car payments, I had the societal expectations that I had built up with my family, and I found no way to break free from it. And then I started examining different luminaries that I call them, people like Oprah Winfrey. I studied Hilary Swank, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Thaddeus Bullard, who many of you know, who's a friend of mine, Vincent Jackson, my late friend, and many others. And I started to think, like, what differentiates these people? What allows them to craft these lives that they have? And I discovered 12 principles over a 7-year period, examining 750 of them, that I saw played out time and time again. And they manifest themselves in mindset shifts, which really dictate your why and how you approach your life. Behavior shifts, which is the what that you do, and it's how you accomplish the how. And then a psychology of progress that they all use, which you could think of as the where and the when that you take these actions. And so the book really explores these 12 principles through the psychology of progress, which is really about how do you make intentional actions towards becoming who you aspire to be. And I've used this formula now in the book and on the podcast, and to me it's been life-altering because I've used these same principles in my own life. I call it me search, because I didn't want to put something out in the world that I hadn't tried myself. But my hope with talking to you today and with this book and with everything I'm doing is I want to help every single person understand that the most incredible person that any of you are ever going to meet is the person who you stare at in the mirror every single morning. And the second you realize that you're the most amazing person you will ever meet, the more you can live your authentic self. But the counter of that is the most competitive person you're ever going to meet, the person who's the visionary arsonist who's going to get in your way, is also that person standing in the mirror. And so what my book explores is how do you bridge that gap. So I hope that gave you a good introduction, and I'm just so thankful for being here today.